The biggest news, of course, is that very, very late last night, like early morning, the White House and Congress did strike a deal to deliver $2 trillion in government relief to a nation increasingly under lockdown, according to the New York Times. That $2 trillion in relief is only part of the spending here. The fact is that this, which is the biggest, it's not a bailout, but the biggest spending plan in the history of the world, I mean, not just the United States, in the history of the world, is only part of the deal here. The Treasury is also floating about $4 trillion in spending with regard to buying up commercial paper, buying up bank loans, and all of the rest. So what exactly is in this giant rescue bill? Well, a lot. So according to, first of all, I think it's important to note here that Nancy Pelosi to the last minute was insisting that her holding this thing up over the weekend was a good idea. And the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, she was on TV yesterday suggesting that the bill should have been held up over environmental concerns of all things. And great legislative leadership here from Nancy Pelosi. Basically, we end up with effectively a very, very close cousin to the deal that was rejected several times on Monday by the Democrats. Here was Nancy Pelosi just before the passage of this deal insisting the deal had to include environmental protections. Because I don't know about you, but when the entire world economy is on the brink of complete and utter disaster, the thing I am worried most about is forcing airlines to lower their carbon emissions. Here was Nancy Pelosi last night being an idiot.
I do think that there is a whole concern in our country that if we're giving tens of billions of dollars to the airlines, that we could at least have a shared value about what happens to the environment. But that is that is an excuse, not a reason for Senator McConnell to go forward. Some of the other issues, like not fully extending family medical leave, not funding food stamps, I hope that will all change in the next few hours. But there are issues that are central to the well-being of America's families.
Okay, I mean, priorities. The fact that this person was described as a legislative mastermind over the last year is insane to me. A person who surrendered to the squad and then proceeded to run a botched impeachment attempt and then, for no reason at all, held up a rescue package. By the way, it was the prospect of the passage of that rescue package that led to the single greatest jump in the Dow Jones Industrial Average in the history of the Dow Jones Industrial Average yesterday. It jumped over 2,000 points. Well, right now, at this hour, we're still waiting for Nancy Pelosi's go-ahead. She said that the new bipartisan agreement, quote, takes us a long way down the road in meeting the needs of the American people, but she didn't endorse it. She said House Democrats will now review the final provisions and legislative text of the agreement to determine a course of action. So she's still gumming up the works at least a little bit, but this thing appears to be a foregone conclusion at this point. So what exactly is in this thing? Well, there are a bunch of major spending provisions. Obviously, the New York Times has a rundown of some of the big provisions. They say the government will send direct payments to taxpayers. Lawmakers have agreed to provide $1,200 in direct payments to taxpayers with incomes up to $75,000 per year. By the way, it's an insane provision. The Democrats basically made it that if you make over $75,000 per year, you're going to have to pay that back to the government. So the government destroyed your job. The government destroyed your business. And now the government's going to sign you a check with the proviso that you have to pay it back if you make more than $75,000 per year. By the way, those are the people who make $75,000 per year who are probably in the long term going to be hit the hardest, not because they're the ones making the most, the least money. Obviously, there are people who are making less money, but because those are the ones who are going to see the greatest gap between what they were making and what they are currently making, namely the difference between $100,000 and zero, as opposed to a person who's already on food stamps or welfare, or a person who's already on unemployment, or a person whose salary may drop from $60,000 to $35,000. If you drop from $75,000 to zero, that is actually a bigger drop. Now, again, that doesn't mean that poor people don't deserve the money. People who are poor do deserve the money. But the point is the people who are running the businesses are the people who are hiring the poor people. And a lot of those people are now being floated basically zero interest loans that are non-forgivable. According to the federal government, let's put it this way. If the Republicans had proposed this, everybody would be up in arms. Democrats proposed it. So, of course, it's no big deal at all. Families would receive $500 per child in an attempt to create a safety net for people whose jobs and businesses are affected by the pandemic. By the way, you get no money, none, if you earn more than $99,000 a year. So you get $1,200 in direct payments up to $75,000 if you earn $75,000 last year, which, by the way, that's not what you're earning this year, not in this economy. So it means testing this stuff is very bizarre. Okay, and ending for people who earn more than $99,000 a year at all. So if you earned $100,000, you and your spouse, then presumably you make nothing. You go home with zero. Okay, unemployment benefits do grow substantially. They go to many more Americans. Lawmakers agreed to a significant expansion of unemployment benefits that would extend jobless insurance by 13 weeks and include a 4-month enhancement of benefits. That is not a grave change from over the weekend. Over the weekend, the Republicans were already proposing 3 months of extension of jobless insurance and enhancement of benefits. It has moved up by 1 month. Democrats wanted it to be 6 months. really Democrats wanted it to be permanent. The program was broadened to include freelancers, furloughed employees, and gig workers such as Uber drivers. So, those people need to make money as well, obviously. It's going to be kind of hard to tamp down exactly how much money those people were making in the first place. Small business will receive emergency loans, but only if they keep their workers. So if you're a small business and you're preparing for the future and you're saying to yourself, okay, we're not going to have the same customer base 2 months from now that we do now, which is obviously true, then you have to keep your workers in order to receive the loan in the first place, which again is a bizarre situation because it just means mass layoffs in 2 months. Instead of everybody being laid off right now and then receiving unemployment benefits and then being rehired as appropriate, instead, we are now forcing companies to continue to pay their employees who will then be hired at the first moment that is available. The bill provides federally guaranteed loans available at community banks to small businesses that pledge to not lay off their workers. The loans would be available during an emergency period ending June 30th and would be forgiven if the employer continues to pay workers for the duration of the crisis. But it's unclear exactly how the duration of the crisis is defined exactly. Senator Rubio worked with Democrats to create this program. He said the goal is to keep employees connected to their employers so that people aren't just having to stay home and aren't just feeling the stress of being laid off, but the uncertainty of whether they'll even have a job to go back to. But this doesn't alleviate that because, again, the minute that all of these restrictions are off and we go back to the world in somewhat regular fashion, those jobs are not going to exist anymore. I mean, let's be real about this. If you're in the cruise line industry and you're taking a bailout to keep all of your cruise line employees employed over the next 2 months, do you really think those people are going to be employed in month 3? The answer, of course, is no. They're not going to be employed in month 3 because at that point, I mean, they're going to get fired, right? I mean, the cruise industry is going to go the way of the dodo bird, at least for several years here. Distressed companies can receive government bailouts. They're not bailouts, guys. If you shut down a company and then you pay the company, that's not a bailout. But distressed companies can receive government money with strings attached. Loans for distressed companies would come from a $425 billion fund controlled by the Federal Reserve. An additional $75 billion would be available for industry-specific loans, including to airlines and hotels. By the way, that was sort of pretty much what was in the weekend bill that Democrats were whining about. The creation of the Federal Reserve Fund was one of the chief sticking points in negotiations because people were worried about the 2008 Wall Street bailout. Democrats pressed for immediate disclosure of recipients and stronger oversight, including installing an inspector general and congressionally appointed board to monitor it, which, again, I don't have any problem with. Companies that benefit could not engage in stock buybacks while receiving government assistance and for an additional year after that. Okay, I have a question about the additional year after that. It's one thing to say no stock buybacks because we're trying to keep people employed right now. If you're worried about the stock market, you idiots, you're going to need companies to buy back their own stock if they feel that their stock is undervalued. Okay, that's all a stock buyback is. If your company is being undervalued on the open market and you wish to regain more control of your company, one of the things that you're going to have to do is buy back stock. Okay, particularly in a situation where the stock market is falling precipitously. You want 401ks to go back up. You're going to need Amazon to be able to buy back its own stock. Democrats also secured a provision ensuring that Trump's family businesses or those of any other senior government officials cannot receive loan money through the fund. Okay, so question, why are Trump's employees worse than other employees? It is one thing if he's getting exorbitant money. I mean, we're going to see that through disclosure rules, but I'm just wondering why Trump is being singled out this way. Or, by the way, anybody else who's employed by a business that is connected to one of the senators or Congress people. There are a lot of employees who are working for businesses that are tangentially connected to members of Congress. Okay, hospitals would receive aid. The agreement includes $100 billion for hospitals and healthcare systems across the nation. And that, of course, was going to be in the bill already. The Senate is also poised to approve some $350 billion in loans to small business in an effort to keep Americans on payrolls. A major challenge in the negotiations was that $500 billion is according to the Wall Street Journal. The Treasury Secretary will have the authority to directly lend a slice of those funds. So not much changed over the weekend. It was just that Nancy Pelosi held this thing up for basically no reason because we're always going to tack on more spending after this. Meanwhile, in other financial news, U.S. 3-month treasuries have now dipped below zero. We now have negative interest rates on 3-month treasury bonds, which is to say that the demand for bonds in the short term is extraordinarily high. Also, the Federal Reserve is currently attempting to push banks to lend. The way they do that is basically by charging banks to stow their money with the Federal Reserve. They're telling them, don't stow your money here, right? Go lend it out. The problem is, beyond the obvious, which is making sure that people who are already in hock because of the current shutdown don't get foreclosed upon, don't have their loans recalled. Aside from that, who's lending money to start a business at this point? Who's going to start a business in this climate? I mean, very, very difficult to imagine a lot of people who are looking to take out new loans from banks to start a business, for example. The problem right now is that the underlying economic issue is, in fact, the virus itself, and that is not going to be healed. So the government has done, at this point, basically what it appears it can do to hold everything in place for the moment. Now the question becomes, what's the next step? How do we get out of all of this? How do we move beyond what is going on right now? And key to that question is going to be how fast we get our arms around coronavirus itself. Did you know that every like on this video creates one additional leftist tier? Don't ask me why. That's called science. To take advantage of this amazing opportunity, hit the like button.